Welcome back to Fancastic with myself, Dr. Kristy Short, Christine Triantos of Infinite Ties. We're here this week to talk about a topic that needs to be talked about more in firms, and that is the topic of unprofitable CAS clients. I think this is a reality. Christine, do you agree?
And then some, right? I mean, I think we all just get stuck in it and we don't realize it, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's just jump into the first question because I know just from working in the profession so long that accounting firms tend to undervalue themselves in the first place. With CAS, I think it's a bigger problem because this is the service that's value based. So I guess the first question is let's talk about assessing the current client base for CAS in firms. Like, where do firms start in assessing their current clients?
I mean, every firm does this, but they really take it down to the basic traditional metrics, right? Of what is realization, what's yield, what's gross profit margins, all of that. But really, what we're trying to say is, when you take it down to the really detailed level, is looking at down to net income per partner at that level. Because when we take it, when you're baking in all of the compensation, fringe benefits, the overhead, all of the pieces, what clients are actually really profitable at that point. And you can even get to this in a gross margin perspective if you have all of the fees baked in. And we find variances within firms, right? Because a lot of firms that we talk to sometimes their gross margin per FTE is really, really high. And then we start asking what's baked into your cost of goods sold. And there's a lot of things that they put below the line versus above the line. And so that just does change the metrics within accounting firms. So that's an interesting take there. We consult with a lot of firms too, and getting to the clients that are actually costing the firm money. That's where this is a problem, right? Because if we're not taking it down to a level where we can really assess, it's almost it's just sad. And it makes you want to cry when you put into all of those hours and all of that work into these clients. And then at the end of the day, you're actually losing money. You're actually paying for them to be your client.
Right. I know from working with hundreds of firms, this is a really sensitive topic when you talk about I'm not talking about assessing ideal clients, I'm talking about what you do when you realize someone isn't an ideal client because there's emotion attached to clients. So, I think we have to say that out loud. And my question to you then is how do you balance caring about the client with the firm's business needs? Because you can't keep every client based on emotion, especially if they're losing you money.
I agree. And I think, to even further your point is emotional, is it's internally emotional and externally emotional, right? Because when you first think about the internal emotional aspect of it, is it tied to a tax client, tax service offerings and a tax partner and tax team? And they're like, no, you have to do this because they're a big client for us over here. Or, is it such a large client that appears to bring in a lot of revenue, but it really isn't profitable? And so you have those internal, um, I would call them emotional factors. And then you have the client external emotional factors of, what are we doing? A lot of these um, firms, I grew up this way, like grew up in a farm my entire life for the last 30 years. And those clients become your friends. And
Mhm.
and it's just a really hard place to be. But this is year over year over year where you're just trying to bring up your profit margins, but then these clients are also taking all of your team's time, right? And so it's freeing up that the right space to either have the conversation with them about increasing their fees. And what I find though is because this isn't we're just going to go and fire all these clients. That's not
Right.
what this is. This
Right.
is this is a minimum 12-month assessment process and then how you start to fix them. So it's not like a black and white. This is let's just assess where we are. Let's just as a CAS team, as a firm, really identify where we're going with this and what our objectives are rather than I always say just adding people to the fire, adding people to what we feel is the problem. That's not the problem. I just always want to challenge firms to say, can we just take what we have? Can we improve what we have before we just keep adding? and adding to something that's not necessarily, the right process or working really well.
Just coming from my own perspective and my clients, I know I love my clients too, and it would be painful to identify one that wasn't ideal and that I had to, I guess, fire is the only word I can think of. And firms feel that too. So I didn't want to run past that. A couple of things I want to mention. First is from my own perspective, I know how close I am to my clients. And the thought of terminating a client based on the fact that, the assessment didn't come out in terms of what value I, as their contractor, am getting, it's it's painful. So can we talk more on the value aspect of that?
Absolutely, because I think, and I think we touched on this on one of the other podcasts, but it's just about we do things so well behind the scenes that we make it look easy for clients, right? And we're not placing the value in their face. They don't really understand what we are doing to substantiate those fees. And so, when you and I always say for every new client that you priced properly and that comes in, all you're gonna do is just have a conversation with one of the bottom clients, and then you just start, improving your bottom client base and you're getting new clients, and so you're just bringing up those margins. But having the conversation is just, "Hey, do you know what we do for" and it's not the client's fault. It's not their fault at all. This is how we've all been taught to provide services, I think, in a traditional accounting firm is just do the work. But I think in the CAS space, it's even more apparent that we have to provide and showcase the value to the clients, um, because they don't really know what we're doing. And so having those conversations is just to say, here's where we had these conversations. Here's where we've been for the last, couple of years. I mean, because firms let this go, I did let this go a couple of years to say, here are the margins. I know this isn't your fault. This is where we are. And here's where we're basically losing money. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we have to like double your fees, sometimes triple your fees. And they're like, wow, we didn't really understand and know. But I was also emotionally detached to say, am I okay if this client says no? And am I okay letting this client go? Yes. But then they never left. They didn't leave.
And I find that's true. When I talk to a lot of firms, I find that's true. Once they have what they think is this hard conversation, which actually just turns out to be a very honest, heartfelt conversation, the majority of their clients do not leave. And I've heard the ones that do, it's kind of like a whew, like they were really unprofitable. So it's a good thing that it was their decision to leave.
Exactly. Exactly. But it really is taking this. I mean, we're getting into the details too, but it starts at that top level, right? It might start with, your managing partner, firm management, CAS partners, CAS leaders of what are the objectives? And then how are we going to go about this? Because again, this isn't some radical just go turn your entire client base upside down and, hope for the best. This is a very well thought out process and system.
Well, you said it was a 12-month assessment. Typically, it runs over 12 months, so it's got to be well thought out, well planned, and well structured. I mean, it spans a long time.
It's I mean, it doesn't take that as long to assess, but, here let's just talk about some of the things that we look at, what you should be looking at when you're assessing your current client base. We look at trailing 12 months of financial data, and what does that look like? How many hours from each person has time into this client? Are they onshore? Are they offshore? What level are they? And when we come out at the other end, we're like, "Okay, here are all the hours and all of the time that the work was done at the wrong levels. Okay. Here are all the clients that are hourly, that are not fixed fee. Okay. Like we're not capitalizing on either pushing the work or we're not capitalizing on implementing technology. But you can't implement those two things and you can't do those two things easily unless they're on a fixed fee, right? Because if they're not on a fixed fee, you're just going to decrease your revenue. But getting to repaper them even, so there's 2 pieces, right? Let's have the conversation and repaper this client for the fee that they should be at. Then could be along the same lines and or separate conversation of let's repaper just to get them from hourly to fixed fee and then implement all of these efficiencies. But that conversation with the client and then getting them out the new contract and having them sign. When I say, it's just all of those conversations and steps that need to happen that do take time.
A lot of pieces and parts.
Right.
So that leads me to my next question. Like, once you've identified your clients that are unprofitable, what's next?
So it's that's the key. So and it's also creating your metrics are for your CAS client base. Like what's your minimum? What are your bottom line? So you're going to start with that bottom client. So again, at that point it's identifying, so it's scope, identifying what that is, and then um it's also about creating your, which this is a totally separate podcast, but creating what your new ideal client profile is and seeing if your existing clients can start to meet that ideal client profile of how you go sell now, right? How you
That
go
is
sell.
such a smart thing to bring up, and that will be another episode on its own, but that's so important. Once you go through this process, you do unintentionally sort of start to build an ideal client profile or an ICP. So that's something I didn't want to run past either, that's so important for future work once you get past the assessment, so you don't get yourself back into the same situation of having a list of clients that aren't profitable for your firm.
Exactly. And so that's, that's what we're just advising is to just pause, stop adding people, right? And let's just pause and assess what we have here in place and what can we revamp with our existing team and how can we improve this and how can we create capacity with the existing client base and the existing team while increasing margins. And so that step is really tenfold, right? Because it is a very well thought out strategic plan. But then it is, once you have that, then it is going from the bottom up and just having, make a goal of we're gonna have this conversation with one client every month, two clients every quarter. It doesn't matter. It's just at least it's something that's on the table that your teams know we have to have a conversation with at least one or two clients in the next quarter.
Well, let's go
Mhm.
back to the fee increase conversation part of this, because I know a lot of listeners are thinking, that makes me uncomfortable. So, how do you make those fee increase conversations work? Are there specific tips that you can provide?
Yes. So, I mean, a lot of it is spending a lot of time in the analysis of it, right? Because there's something that's, if you as the firm are part of the problem, which we often are, right? And when I say part of the problem is an example of that work not being pushed down and their fees not where, where it needs to be, but we have the wrong level doing what the client needs, right? So is that the client's problem or is that a firm problem?
Mhm.
And so we can't just keep increasing fees just because we haven't figured out how to best serve our clients. And we all do this. I did it forever too. And so it's assessing the service offerings at the right level, but then having the conversation once. And again, when you start having these fee conversations of increasing fees with clients, your your service offering and what you deliver on a monthly basis has to be in tip top shape. It has to be good because if you're like, oh, we're 6 months behind, we're 3 months behind, and we haven't issued you financials, but hey, can we go ahead and increase this fee? That doesn't resonate, right? Like the value has to be there, the service has to be there. Like it just has to be in really good shape in order to have that conversation. But then at that point, the conversation should become easier because if you've had that client even for a year, you can say, you know what, here's what we've been averaging over the last 12, 24, 36 months. And instead of you wondering, we really just want to come in as your trusted advisor. And so this is where we just feel like our flat monthly fee is going to come in each month. That way, you don't have to wonder. You can properly budget for our time and you can call us and not feel like you're going to get billed for that because it's all now just baked in. So then when you flip that for the client, when it's like, "Oh, that's really advantageous to us," then it becomes a different value proposition.
Yeah. And once you get further down that road, I mean, the overall impact has to be bigger than what we've talked about. I mean, for example, just by repricing or fixing those pricing issues, we've sort of created a whole new revenue stream. So just talk about what's the long-term impact of this entire process beyond what we've talked about so far.
I think the long-term impact is, we just are building better teams because in one of the other podcasts, we talked about how we have the wrong goals tied to the, the wrong strategic objectives, right? And so when the wrong goals are tied to strategic objectives, this doesn't work well, right? But then because repapering, moving from hourly to fixed, implementing technology, all of those things and creating capacity for your team to go sell other clients at that higher rate and, higher service level offerings,
Yeah.
that's the long-term end result of this. And I would love to do a study on this and just be in with all the firms to understand how this could really work, but you are just increasing your gross margins, your net income per partner without really adding any cost to your book of business.
Yes. So you mentioned goals. And in the last episode, we did talk about revised overall goals and how firms think about CAS in relation to traditional goals that are typically set, which we know don't work for CAS practices. So let's end here as well. So you're talking about revised goals specifically for this process of assessing clients, identifying ideal clients, and moving non-ideal clients out of the process. So, and we will have these in the show notes. We will provide this as a walk away. But do you want to talk through some of those revised goals for this particular process to move firms from red to the black where CAS is concerned?
Yeah, I think yeah, this is great. And we just had this conversation with a firm this week too, but it was moving the goals. It was what's your new client revenue goal? Okay. If your new client revenue goal is $1 million, all of that's not just going to come from new clients. We're going to put them into each of these buckets. We're going to put them into new clients. We're going to put them into repapering to the accurate fee. We're going to put it, another bucket is going to be upselling an existing client. Hey, we do this for this other client. Is this of interest to you? Fantastic. That's an extra $500 a month. We're going to have cross selling, which is forging those relationships with your tax team. And then you have like the M&A bucket of, firms acquiring firms. But then taking that goal, so let's just say it was an upsell or a repaper fee, was then how many managers do you have? Okay. So now let's change that goal from whatever it is you have that's not creating margin gain. And let's change that goal for the manager to say, you are now assigned, you have 3 clients that you need to go find in the next 6 months to increase their fee by $500 and upsell them. Right? And so it's really making this digestible, and that's small, but it's making it digestible so every manager, every team has a goal that's just attainable, right? This is not a hard reach. I'm going to go find 3 clients and I'm going to say, "Oh, I have this construction client or this restaurant client," and I'm going to show them what I'm doing for my other restaurant client.
Well, and just to mention a few other things that I think sometimes firms don't think about. So, even like in the soft skill area, making these conversations part of the culture, making them the norm so that it's not just the practice leaders that have this conversation, but really some of your staff, your team members can have this conversation as well. But make sure to communicate that and cascade that down throughout the whole team so the entire cast practice is speaking the same language.
Exactly. And role playing, I know as corny as that sounds, especially for accountants.
It
I
works.
mean, exactly.
It
Like
totally
just
works.
within teams, like just role play this and think of every objective that client's going to have and how you're going to respond to whatever those triggers are for the client or objections that the client's going to have to just be able to articulate what your value is and why you're having the conversation in the first place.
Yeah, a fair amount of preparation is what you're talking about too. Like making sure you get those conversations right, record that, document that. I mean, there is immense value documenting every process, but this process as well. I mean, it's not something that's not something that should be overlooked. Everyone should be speaking the same language.
Exactly. And to your point though too, I think this is what we need to as firms do a better job is that soft skill training, right? we're just training people how to be accountants, but are we really training them how to really sit in a room and have those conversations? Or have they heard it enough from their leadership group to understand how it needs to go? Because it doesn't need to be contentious. It doesn't need to be
No, it doesn't.
it's just it's just a conversation, and really what's the end goal? And but again, not being emotionally tied to what that outcome is, I think is also really important. And taking a step back and saying, okay, is this good? Is this good for the firm? Is this good for my team? Is this good for me? Like it's all of those things, right? It's and then is it good for the client? But what comes first? In what order do you put those in? And I'm not telling you which order to put it in. I'm just saying, think about which order those should be.
All good information. I think we covered a lot of really good stuff to make this episode of Fancastic fantastic. Any final thoughts? Anything that you think we've missed?
No, I wouldn't say missed. I would just say, just take the time to do this exercise because we all just get so busy in our day, and we just do the day without stopping and really being strategic rather than just saying, "Oh, I have to hit this, new client revenue target." Just pause and just give yourself some room to breathe and do this assessment and see what you can create from margin and capacity by just pausing for just a moment.
Well, thank you, Christine, for another episode of immense expertise.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. Please join us next time for another CAS packed episode. That is our promise to you. And this is Fantastic.